Hello, everybody. Douglas V. Gibbs here, Constitution Study Television. For those of you who've been loyal followers of this page from the very beginning, I apologize. It's been a couple weeks. Hopefully now I can finally get into a groove where we're putting out videos regularly. I had a surgery a couple weeks ago. I get the stitches out today. It was on my mouth. Not doing a lot of talking during that time period, so I appreciate your patience. We are planning on doing this as much as we can, and once again, videos regularly. That's the plan anyway. So thanks for your patience. I wanted to talk about violence today, and created myself a new studio. I like this one much better than the old one. And on the sidebars, you can see videos showing depictions of violence. And on the right-hand side at the top is last Thursday night's football game between the Browns and the Steelers, and something that hasn't happened since the 70s. One of the defensive players pulled the helmet off of the quarterback, swung it around, and hit the quarterback in the head with it. Unfortunately, the positioning of the helmet, it was partial padding, so he didn't wind up with a concussion or anything like that. Then afterwards, another defensive player just clocked the quarterback, knocking him to the ground. Then one of the Steeler players, in defense of his quarterback, ran over to Mr. Bennett, Mr. Garrett, Myles Garrett, the one who had swung the helmet, and began hitting him, kicking him in the head. And they talked about, well, this was unprecedented. We didn't see this kind of violence in football. Well, actually, I remember back in the 70s, Raiders' Lyle Alzado ripped a helmet off of an offensive player, swung it at him, used it as a weapon. And so that's the reason why the NFL has a rule that you can't use the helmet, any piece of equipment, as a weapon. Now, if this had happened in the street, Myles Garrett, the player from the Cleveland Browns that swung the helmet into the quarterback's head of the Steelers, he would have been arrested for assault. Below that, you see an image of a brawl between the Pirates and the Reds back in April. Puig was just out of control. There was another brawl later on in the season where a pitcher was out of control. And it's happening with more frequency and more violence than before. Now, bench clearing brawls are a part of baseball, and we've seen them. I've seen them all my life, but nothing like we saw this year. On the left-hand side, the top one is in Portland with Antifa. The second one down, I believe, is Ferguson, and the one at the bottom is Baltimore. Now, the reason why I wanted to show all of this is I wanted to, talk about violence. And the thing is, in our society, we know that the violence seems to be increasing, that there's an anger out there and lack of morality and a thuggishness that seems to have emerged that we don't remember being there before. Now, this is not to say that violence doesn't exist or didn't exist before. Our country became independent from the British Empire because of violence. We had a bloody revolution. And the Founding Fathers, they were aware of violence and that there would be violence. And that's the reason why, if you open up your pocket Constitution, you go to Article 1, Section 8. One of the things that says in Article 1, Section 8 is that Congress has the power to provide for calling forth the militia to execute the laws of the Union, suppress insurrections, and repel invasions. Suppress insurrections. That's violence. That's rebellion against the system. Then Article 1, Section 10, it says that no state shall, without the consent of Congress, lay any duty of tonnage, keep troops, or ships of war in time of peace, enter into any agreement or compact with another state, or with foreign power, or engage in war, unless actually invaded or in imminent danger, as will not admit of delay. So, also, the states have the ability to pull up troops in case there's an outside violence coming in, invasion, or so on and so forth. And the whole purpose of the Constitution being written, it being decided that in May of 1787 they would meet to quote-unquote fix the Articles of Confederation, was a result of violence. Just like the American Revolution was a result of violence, the writing of the Constitution was Shays' Rebellion. The American Revolution veterans had been paid with fiat money under the Articles of Confederation. When they went to pay their bills with it, the creditors weren't accepting this worthless paper money, and so they rebelled. They created this moment of insurrection. They were blocking the steps of the courthouses so that the creditors could not deliver the lawsuits or get the lawsuit started with the courts. They were, protesting and rallying, and at one point even tried to get into the Springfield, Massachusetts armory, arms and ammunition for violence. So violence is a part of our history. We get that. So what's going on? Why do we feel like society has gotten more violent now than before? And is it something that's constitutional? What can the government do constitutionally? Well, first of all, like I said earlier in Article 1, Section 8, if Congress feels it necessary, they can call up the militia to subdue insurrection. Like Watts riots, National Guard came out. Rodney King riots, National Guard came out. This was a congressional decision that was totally constitutional, Article 1, Section 8, to quell the violence. But Benjamin Franklin said something that I thought was fascinating, and I think it really is the key here when we talk about violence. Benjamin Franklin said that only a virtuous people are capable of freedom. As nations become corrupt and vicious, they have more need of masters. Corrupt and vicious, vicious being violent. Okay? So it begins, only a virtuous people are capable of freedom. What does he mean by a virtuous people? Well, he's known for his writings about the 13 virtues, but also what he means is a godly people, a moral people. Remember, John Adams said, our Constitution was made only for moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate to the government of any other. These two men were in agreement that we need to be a godly, moral nation, whether it's through Christianity, Judaism, combination of both, or whatever. I mean, Rome, when you read the writings of Cicero, as he neared his final days on this planet, he was taking notice that in Rome, and understand this before the birth of Christ, so we're not talking Christianity, we're not talking Judaism, we're talking, the Romans had all their gods and all sort of stuff, so it's about being a virtuous people, not necessarily about a particular religion. But Cicero was noticing that the republic was in danger, and what was happening at the same time was a loss of foundational morality. That they were no longer following the fundamental principles that began their very successful republic. Rome had gone through three phases: a kingdom, a republic, and then eventually an empire under a succession of Caesars. And Cicero, right before Julius Caesar and all of that, was noticing that the republic was in trouble and that one of the symptoms was violence. One of the symptoms was a loss of virtue, a loss of following the fundamental principles and moral center that had made Rome so great. And in fact, one of the consuls of that time, that right now off the top of my head the name escapes me, was using street gangs to try to encourage a more authoritarian system. Because if there's street gangs, it's causing violence in the streets. What does it do? It creates a situation where the government now has to come out with the troops to quell the violence. In other words, disorder causes the population to cry out for order, and the people in position to give order, provide order, are the very people who started the disorder in the first place. That's how tyranny does it. So, and that's, I think, what we're seeing today. The very people who want really a statist system, a big government, authoritarian system where government is controlling your health care and controlling all the other things. These are the same people, or at least their supporters, that are being violent in the streets. And these are the same politicians that are inciting this kind of violence and inciting an attitude, an anti-God attitude, an anti-virtuousness attitude that is really creating a society full of violence. I mean, and we've got all kinds of factors, and I'm not saying that any of these factors independently are to blame, but they all contribute. You get the violent video games, you got the violent movies, you got violence on television, you got violence in music. There's a Sublime song where it states, doing an MF and 187 on an MF and cop. Well, 187 being killing, murder. So, this violence is just filled our society. Now, what is the problem the violence, or is it a symptom of what's really going on? And let's get back. Now, this brings us back to Benjamin Franklin. Only virtuous people are capable of freedom. As nations become corrupt and vicious, notice the violence and corruption go together. If we're corrupt, we're going to be vicious. And if we're corrupt, what does that mean? We're not being virtuous. We have left what it means to be virtuous. As nations become corrupt and vicious, they have more need of masters. As the violence ensues, as the disorder takes hold, as the ungodliness spreads like a disease, we will have more need of masters. We will be calling out for rulers and authoritarians for peace and safety. The founding fathers believed in an idea, the economic idea, but really was an idea across the board of laissez-faire, allowing things to take their own course without government interference. The idea is we don't want government interfering, and we don't want our culture to head in an ungodly direction. Both of those things are important. But what we've got is we've got less people in church in today's society, and a vicious, corrupt society that has become corrupt and vicious largely because of progressive ideas, leftist ideas, and an injection, a slow, over the last 100 to 200 years injection, but it's picked up speed, of socialism. Socialism is anti-God, anti-laissez-faire, anti-individualism. What was the difference between the French Revolution and the American Revolution? Why was the American Revolution successful, and why was the French Revolution a disaster? The difference was, and as a matter of fact, on my Constitution podcast, I talked about the same thing. If you want to go Constitution podcast, youtube.com/Douglas V. Gibbs. What was the difference? The American Revolution was they according to the Declaration of Independence. Matter of fact, here, let me look it up so I can read it word for word so that we get this. With a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence. So it was a godly revolution. God was involved. They believed that divine providence was guiding them and protecting them. With a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, our sacred honor. So first of all, it was a godly revolution. They believed that God's hand was on it. They included God in the formation of our system. And it was about individualism. So that each of us could have individual natural rights, so we could each live an individual life with voluntary decisions in our life and have voluntarily and individually influence our system, so on and so forth. The French Revolution was about secularism and collectivism. No God, no individualism. Result, violence. Violence is only the symptom. It is a symptom of the loss of our heart. Our hearts have grown cold. Our hearts have grown black with evil. We're no longer a virtuous society. And so as we become corrupt and vicious, we have more need of masters. And I hate to sound like I'm trying to preach at you. I'm a Christian. I do believe in a strong moral center. And I know that not every person who is conservative or not conservative, whatever, they don't agree with me religiously. You know, my friend Loki, Tim Curlin, who I used to do Constitution broadcasts on Blog Talk Radio with, used to talk about our natural rights, and that they were God-given. But he considered himself an agnostic. In other words, he believed that there was something out there. He didn't know if it was necessarily God. And one day I said, whoa, wait a second, buddy. You keep talking about God-given rights, God-given rights, God-given rights, but I thought you were an agnostic. And he says to me, well, not when it comes to my rights. He had a moral center. He may not have been a Christian, but he had a moral center. But he did believe in the moral values that comes with Christianity. Just like Cicero believed in the moral values that came with what developed that Republic of Rome. Whether it's Christianity, Judaism, the old Roman religions, whatever. You have to have a strong moral center as a country. Because, see, immoral people follow the law. Immoral people appreciate the liberty and do what it takes to maintain it, and so on and so forth. If you're not a moral people, you become a system of takers. You become a system of big government, totalitarianism, authoritarianism. And it is anti-God. It is anti-morality, because your morality comes from government. Your rights come from government. Everything comes from government. And then government has to become totalitarian, because with that hole in society, H-O-L-E hole, where our virtuousness has vanished, we reach for something. And we become violent reaching for that. And government must clamp down to control it and restore order. Reminds me of the Tytler cycle, where systems of liberty, according to the Scottish political philosopher Alexander Tytler, that these systems of liberty last between 200 and 250 years. They begin in bondage, and then they have a spiritual awakening, a moral center, become virtuous. And from that, they become courageous. And they fight for their liberty. And out of it becomes liberty. And from that liberty comes prosperity. And after that prosperity, the society becomes selfish, apathetic, complacent, and then dependent upon government, and ultimately works its way back up to bondage. Is that the cycle we're in? Spiritual awakening was the beginning of liberty. We need to be a virtuous society. Benjamin Franklin told us so. Only a virtuous people are capable of freedom. In order to remain free and to keep this republic intact, we've got to get rid of the violence. We've got to get rid of the immorality. We've got to reach out to God. That's a tough task at hand. It begins in our churches, and it begins with us. If we're not a good example, how's the younger generation going to know what to do and how to act? All right, thanks for watching Constitution Study Television. Once again, I'm post-operation, getting the stitches out today in my mouth. So hopefully we'll get back to a regular regiment of videos. Appreciate you, those of you who are already watching this, and you're the loyal ones. Spread the word. Go to other YouTube videos. Say, hey, there's this conservative guy, this Constitution guy over at Constitution Study Television and over at Constitution Podcast at youtube.com/Douglas V. Gibbs. Tell everybody about it. Subscribe. Hit the notification bell when you subscribe so that you get an email when I do have a new video. I'm also planning on adding other types of things real soon, because the thing is, we are in a war, and we need to do as much as we can to get the word out, get information out, to encourage each other, to fellowship with like-minded patriots. I am Douglas V. Gibbs, douglasvgibbs.com, politicalpistachio.com. United we stand, combined we kick butt. God bless America, my friends. God bless you. Where we go one, we go all. For you Q enthusiasts. I love the president. I think he's doing a great job. I think his impeachment stuff is garbage. And we'll see you next time right here on Constitution Study Television. Thanks for watching. Until next time. Bye.